want to start, though, with the tight end group because I think this was a need all year. The 49ers have George Kittle, who's a true number one tight end. But then the rest of those guys, Charlie Warner, Ross Dwelly, Tyler Croft, to me, those guys are all like third or fourth tight ends. They're just like guys at the back of your roster. I think they really need a legitimate second tight end. And you guys covered this pretty well. They met with a number of guys in Indy. In your mind, who are they most interested in? Who was most impressive to you among the tight ends that you saw in Indianapolis?
So I think the difficult part is that there's like a group at the top that you can just kind of cancel out because the Niners obviously aren't picking till 99. So there are guys like Musgrave and Dalton Kincaid and Darnell Washington who I think are going to be really good tight ends in the NFL, who the Niners just really, unless something changes or they get some capital up there and they want to invest it there, it's pretty clear they're not going to have a run at one of those guys. The guy who impressed me the most was, funny enough, another Iowa tight end was Sam LaPorta. Just the way he looked running drills and they were putting him through all the receiving workouts at the combine, everything just looked so natural for the guy. He looked really smooth. He looked like a natural receiver, whereas a lot of guys were kind of laboring to get through those drills. LaPorta was really, really smooth getting in and out of his breaks, tracking the ball downfield. His footwork looked great. Just everything about it looked good. The pushback I've heard is that there's still room for him to grow, as a blocker, getting a little bit more physical. But to me, it's much easier to get a guy into an NFL weight room and get them, bulked up a bit than it is to teach them the natural receiving skills that I think LaPorta has. So he's kind of been the guy that I have really locked in on. There's another guy from Old Dominion who's really interesting, who I believe was a transfer from Penn State. I think it's Zach Kuntz is the name. I always forget the pronunciation for the last name, but
we're calling him Kuntz.
We're calling him Kuntz. Yeah, that's what I think it is. Yeah, so
I think Kuntz seems safer.
Yes, that's exactly where I was leaning. He's another guy who's really intriguing. His physical profile is really something where, hey, if you see that guy and you have, one of your third round comp picks, he's still on the board, I think it's worth taking a dart throw there. One of the things, I love the draft, Larry, and I love projecting guys. And one of the things I'm trying to get better at myself is not falling in love with just the measurables, because I think there are so many guys who have these incredible athletic profiles, and you're looking at like the RAS scores and all these, 40 times, short shuttle, all that stuff. But at the end of the day, you have to be able to catch a football. You have to be able to run routes. And that's where I keep coming back to LaPorta, where I think he has a fine athletic profile, even if he's not the insane athlete that has these ridiculous testing numbers. And he did run really well. I don't want to undersell how good he was with those. I just think he's perfect for what they need. And especially if you have any concerns about, maybe bulking up a bit or getting a little bit more physical in the run game. You already have a guy like Kittle. You already have a guy like Warner on the roster. So I think he's a guy where you could utilize him as a big slot for a little bit. You could have him be, that secondary receiving option, which allows you to get into personnel groupings with two tight ends, really keep defenses on their heels because you still have to respect the run as well. And, at the end of the day, you're not going to play tight end and see the field at Iowa if you're not capable of blocking. So I do think some of the pushback, he's not a good blocker, I'm like, you're not going to play for Kirk Ferentz if you can't block. So he's the guy that I'm really locked in on, who I think they have a chance to get in that range if they're really locked in on getting a tight end in this draft.
Yeah, I mean, it's a stellar group, man. I think Michael Mayer's a star. Luke Musgrave is a great athlete. Darnell Washington made one of the greatest one-hand catches you're ever going to see at the combine. And Dalton Kincaid was really, really solid at Utah, really excellent receiver. So I think you're right. LaPorta is probably in that third round range. They've got a pick there. Davis Allen, worked out really well for Clemson. You mentioned Kuntz, who's 6'8", and had some great measurables. As far as a player that stood out to me on the football field, not necessarily the workouts, I like Payne Durham this year for Purdue. 6'5", 255 pounds. I kind of liked Luke Schoonmaker, the big 6'6", 250-pound tight end from Michigan. It was interesting. I saw the names of the guys they looked at: Sam LaPorta, Davis Allen, Braden Willis from Oklahoma, Josh Wiley out of Cincinnati. Let me ask you this. What do you think is going to be the need? Do you think they look at tight end and say, man, as you said, hey, we're a running football team, give us the best blocker? And who's considered the best blocker of the group? And then, or do you think they're looking for that movement tight end? I watched Elijah Higgins at Stanford and I saw his combine workout, and I thought, man, with all those 7th round picks, if Higgins is on the board in round 7, he might be a great movement tight end selection on day 3. What do you think is the profile of the tight end that they want?
I think at this point, it has to be another guy where you prioritize the movement and the receiving ability. It's not to undersell how difficult it is or how valuable it is to have somebody who's good at blocking, but I just think that that's a skill set that you can find in, the priority free agent grouping. Find a guy who's a veteran tight end who could come in and do those sort of things. But to have a guy who just has that ability to, again, like I keep coming back to LaPorta, just the way that he made it look effortless when he was coming in and out of his breaks, and the way he was winning when they lined him up. He's running routes out of the backfield, running routes in line, running routes out of the slot. He's just a guy to me where that's what they've kind of been lacking opposite Kittle. And they haven't really had that, I guess the closest thing they've really had to that like big body receiver you could put in the slot is, Dwan Jennings. And I think just having a tight end adds a little bit of a different dynamic. Jennings is an extremely talented blocker, so it's not to undersell the value he brings there. But I just think, the ability to keep defenses in their base personnel, having 3 linebackers on the field, but having guys like Kittle or LaPorta that can attack a defense with the receiving skills they have, I think just puts the 49ers at a tremendous advantage. And, I always come back to, I think New England nailed it, and it's really hard to do. But New England, when they had Gronkowski and Aaron Hernandez, I think that was one of the most difficult mismatches for NFL defenses we've seen in the last couple of decades. And I've, it's not quite the same, but we saw for a moment in time for a couple of weeks there when Jordan Reed had a short stint with the 49ers and Kittle and him were on the field at the same time, you could see there was this, just this ceiling that's there. If the Niners are able to get a legitimate tight end too and pair it with Kittle, I think that on top of all the other weapons they have, it's really going to put opposing defenses at a disadvantage. And I think one of the areas where the 49ers really do stand alone compared to the rest of the NFL is as everything's shifting towards this wide open spread offense, everybody's in 11 personnel, being able to have this smash mouth team with 2 tight ends or a fullback like Kyle Juszczyk. It's really hard to prepare for that when you're preparing for something totally different the other 16 games of the season. So I would love to see them invest a ton of capital into a guy and really turn that second tight end spot into a huge mismatch.
Yeah. And here's the first free agent, category is tight end. As far as I'm throwing your way, there are some interesting names. I mean, they've shown interest in the past in Austin Hooper, who played at De La Salle. He's a free agent. Robert Tonyan, I know, is very close with George Kittle from, tight end U. And I could see Green Bay, this transition from Green Bay's offense to the Niners offense being almost seamless for Tonyan. The other name that's interesting is also a local guy, Josh Oliver, who played at San Jose State, who's, I think, a pretty good football player. What do you think? What's the likelihood that they invest in a tight end via the free agent market?
I think that would be the prudent move just because of how difficult it is to have a tight end who's going to contribute right away. Usually that's the toughest transition for a player from college to the NFL. So even if they get a guy they like in round 3, the odds of them being an immediate contributor aren't great. But there's a couple guys I really do like in this class, the guys you named. And then, I'm a big Irv Smith guy. I liked him a ton coming out. I thought I really thought he'd do well with the Vikings. I don't know if they have plans to bring him back or not. I know he's scheduled for unrestricted free agency, so I wonder if they'll let him test the market. Drew Sample's another guy, Pac-12 guy out of Washington for the Bengals, who doesn't seem like he's kind of going to be back, but he has a lot of athletic traits you like. So they have their options. Realistically, I think a guy like Hooper makes a ton of sense, and they were pretty, it wasn't a secret they were connected to him. I believe it was the 2020 offseason, just after their Super Bowl run. They had some reports that the Niners were looking at him before he signed a big deal elsewhere. Stanford guy. I think that he's somebody that would make a ton of sense for them, that where you just kind of know what you're getting. It may not be the highest ceiling, at this point, but he's reliable and dependable. And I think he's somebody that just kind of checks the boxes they'd be looking for. But if they're banking on upside and athletics, athleticism and a guy we haven't really gotten to see due to some injuries and some other things, Irv Smith for me would be the great dart throw. I think that's the one that would be the most exciting for me, because I think he's a guy who has a ton of athletic ability, and you get him in a scheme like this with Kyle, maybe you unlock that potential that was there coming out.
Yeah, I think there's upside there. I mean, it's a dangerous word, but Irv's shown some talent. But I think you're right. In this scheme, you could see him become a borderline Pro Bowl caliber player in this offense. I really believe that.